Hi all, I hope you've really enjoyed hearing about heroes of our faith in devotions. I've certainly really enjoyed hearing about them. And today I have the great privilege of sharing with you my personal hero from the Bible, and that is Daniel. Now, Daniel was somebody that was born in a really difficult period in Israel's history. Because of Israel's repeated unfaithfulness to God, God had allowed the Babylonians to conquer Israel. And the Babylonians, in an effort to assimilate Israel to their culture, had transported the nobles, the important people, the scholars into their land. And once they were there, they gave them new names, new cultures, and new gods to follow. And it was into this hostile environment that Daniel was living in. Even as a youth in chapter 1, we see that already Daniel is having to walk a very fine line between continuing to worship God in a foreign and hostile land and the pressure to assimilate to the Babylonian ways. And we see throughout the book of Daniel that with God's help, Daniel manages to not only walk this very fine line, but actually thrive. And by the time we get to Daniel chapter 6, we see that Daniel is an old man. He's been in Babylon for over 60 years. And in that time, he's actually outlasted 2 kings and is serving under a 3rd king. And not only has power transitioned between generations, so Nebuchadnezzar the father to Belshazzar his son, power has transitioned between countries from Babylon to Medes. And throughout all this time, Daniel has actually held on to power. And not only this, the kings had respected him and admired him so much that at this point in time, Daniel is causing jealousy and strife at court. So this is what happens in Daniel chapter 6, verse 4. Let me read that for you. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. So people were determined to bring Daniel down, and so they take a fine-tooth comb into Daniel's life and they examine every aspect of it. And I'm sure that they're thinking, come on, this guy has been in public service for 60 years. He must have done something a little bit dodgy. Maybe taken a bribe there, maybe taken one too many sick leaves. Maybe he's treated somebody unfairly and negligently. Surely there's something out there. And what they find is quite amazing. They find nothing, 0. And he's been doing this for over 60 years. And so this is what they end up concluding in verse 5. Let me read verse 5. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." I find these verses staggering. Daniel, who has enemies because he's such a good and man full of such integrity, they find nothing. And he's so much so that his enemies work out what Daniel's life has all been about, which is to serve his God. And this is such a challenge for us as fellow followers of God, don't you think? Our missions pastor, Ed Yorston, often talks about our lives being the 5th gospel. So obviously our lives are not an biographical account of Jesus' life. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John are those things. But when we recommend Jesus to other people and give them a copy of the Gospels, people may or may not read that. But when we recommend Jesus, they are certainly going to look at our lives and they're certainly going to read that and they're going to wonder, do I want to serve the Jesus that they're recommending? Do I want to know more about him? Is he so honest and faithful? Is she so full of integrity that I want to know more? Like Daniel, we are living in a culture that is so hostile to God. It's difficult to walk the fine line between assimilating to the culture around us whilst being faithful to our God. There's so much pressure to give in and live as the world does. But friends, our faithful, loving, and very generous God wants us to live for Him in this world. Not because we have to earn our place in heaven. Jesus has already done that for us. But because through living this way, we can bring others to heaven with us. And so, friends, we have a huge challenge before us to live for God, to be faithful for Him, not so that we can bring glory to ourselves, but to bring glory to Him, and so that others might want to know about our wonderful God.